Some of you know me as a Korea specialist. Some of you know me as a mountain climber. Some of you know me as a alcohol connoisseur. But tonight you'll be introduced to a new side. I am a stamp geek. Closet stamp geek, or recovering stamp geek would be the appropriate title. So you might work there.
Leave them all on.
Okay. One may work. So I've attended off and on Berkeley Asiatic Society gatherings since the late 1980s, and but in my current position, there are not a lot of topics that I can talk freely about in public. And so when Brother Anthony asked me if I could speak, I had to think hard about, okay, what can I talk about that's not going to create any difficulties for me in my work. And found this topic. So I appreciate all of you coming tonight, because let's face it, who cares about stamps anymore? I mean, when's the last time you used one?
Today.
Really?
Yeah.
Yesterday.
I'm in shock. I can't remember the last time I used a stamp.
Mail in your taxes.
Mailing taxes. So, but these are, stamps have rapidly become cultural artifacts. But I found out from Ambassador Kim, very, very exciting there, that I'm not the only stamp geek in the room. And it's funny that back in the 1970s, when Korea was just starting to develop economically, that when new issues would come out, that boys would line up at post offices around Korea to get the new issues. And I've met so many Koreans from my age and older who tell me these stories about going early in the morning before school to the post office to get these new issues. So I know that this was collecting was a big deal. And for me as a boy, it introduced me to the world. I was born in Silicon Valley before it was Silicon Valley. It was just a valley. And I knew nothing about the world other than what Big Blue Marble told me on Saturday mornings before Scooby-Doo. And so my real introduction to the world came, as an elementary school boy with stamps. But, as a lot of hobbies go, by the time I hit high school and discovered the opposite sex, I chucked the stamps. Well, actually, I didn't chuck them. I just put them in a closet and forgot about them for about 10 years. But then, when I came to Korea in the late 1980s, and this was again before the internet age, having grown up with stamps and my family using them, I was sending letters to my family, and I would go to the post office and ask for, can I have the latest Korean stamps, the latest commemorative to use on my mail. And I thought, wow, these are really beautiful. And so this kind of snowballed, and so I need to start collecting new issues, and I need to start getting the older issues, and then pretty soon you have everything, and then you have to start specializing. So that's how the hobby developed for me, was as a boy, and then again living here. It can be a disease, because like anything that you collect, you can, if you're serious or borderline obsessive about it, you can spend far too much time and money on it, and I'm guilty as charged. But I guess 6 years ago I went cold turkey, so I kept my collection, but I have not. Today was my first time to go on eBay again in about 6 years, and there were just a couple of things that I was really tempted to bid on. But anyway, I see stamps as a way of understanding a country's history, a country's culture. There's certainly a propaganda element, because governments do obviously control what stamps are issued. And so we certainly have to be aware of that, certainly with North and South Korea, both. And so what I'd like to do is show you some images and some stories, of how to see Korea North and South, and of course before they were divided, through stamps. And again, I know stamps might not be the most exciting topic in the world, but I hope that it will give you some insights into how the Korean government has seen itself over the last 130 or so years. I've been in a different country. I've been working in a different country every week for about the last month. So I'm saying that as a way of an excuse for apologizing for not having as many slides or as many images as I wanted. It's unfortunate that our hobbies take a back seat to our jobs and our families. And if there's anything to look forward to about children growing up, it's having more time for your family, more time for your hobbies. But I have a 12-year-old, and so any free time I have, I need to give to her before I can stand for even this presentation. But I have a few of my favorite images here that I hope will be some images that you've never seen before. So Korea's development of a postal system and stamps is intertwined with Korea's modernization in general and quest for a flag in particular. And I will tell you that everything I'm saying tonight is things that I've learned over the last 10 or 20 years, but have not put in my short-term memory. So certain individuals, I encourage you to correct me when I'm wrong and to provide more details. But in the early 1880s, Hong Yong-sik, who was a very forward-minded individual, was traveling to Japan, and I think he also went to the United States. 1884, which was the year that Korea issued its first stamps. And this is about the time when Korea is developing a flag, and the Korean kingdom is realizing Japan has a flag, we need a flag. And in a modern communication system, that we need a postal system. So Hong Yong-sik was put in charge of developing a postal system for Korea. It also turns out that he was also interested in leading a rebellion. So in 1884, the Kapsin Jungbyeon, the revolt against the Korean government in 1884 was led by him. So within a matter of weeks of the postal system being established, it was shut down as he was put down in the rebellion. The first stamp, this is actually the second stamp, but I like it better than the first one, color-wise. But these first set of stamps were actually printed in Japan. And this image, I didn't find the original design that he proposed, but this is about the time that Korea is developing its own teguki, its own flag. And but the Japanese who were in charge of making the stamp decided they would not put the teguki in the flag, and they made a modified design of that. But that is not the design that he wanted, because it's not consistent with the Korean flag. But it's what the Japanese were willing to print for him. So these very first issues are known as the moon stamps, because of the currency was denominated in the moon at that time. It was printed in Japan. It was delivered to Korea, but and they initiated service between Seoul and Incheon. But within a matter of weeks, because of the Gapshin rebellion, the service was shut down. Now it's interesting that surrounding this first issue, there's a divide among foreigners and Koreans. Koreans, to an individual who cares about this subject, believe that these stamps were actually used. And if you find one of these stamps used and it's legitimate or considered legitimate, it's worth tens of thousands of dollars. There are only a couple of dozen that are believed to be real. But Western specialists think that they were not ever actually used. That these are all philatelic items, that they're essentially fake or non-legitimate usage. So there's some division over this first issue as to whether it was actually used. But this page gives you kind of an overview of the stamps that Korea issued from 1884, which was this first issue, and then again in 1895. This was the first issue that was actually used for a long period of time. These were printed by the Andrew P. Graham Banknote Company in Washington, D.C. And they're typical of stamps printed in that period. They're fairly high-quality printing. And these were the first four stamps that were issued, and of course incorporating the Korean flag. And these were used from 1895, when postage service was resumed in Korea, and from 1884 until 1895, it was run by the Japanese and other colonial or aspiring colonial powers that had postal services here. But in 1895, these stamps were issued, and these were for several years, were the stamps that were used by Korean missionaries in their mail back to the United States in the late 1890s. At this time, you can see that Korea was referred to as Joseon, and it was in the late 1890s, I believe 1897, that they, again following the lead of Japan, changed their name to be the Empire of Korea. But these are the first issue was printed in Japan. The second issue was printed in the United States. The third issue was the first issue that was actually, and these are the plum blossom stamps, or the Ihwa stamps, were printed in Korea. And then the last definitive issue, the Falcon series, Tokchi series were printed in France. And this is the only commemorative that Korea issued in this period, and it was to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the coronation of the king. And one thing, if I encourage or inspire any of you to collect these stamps, you need to be careful because there are a number of fakes, forgeries, and reprints of these stamps. And if you want to know there are good fakes and bad fakes, on this particular stamp, the easy way to tell a good fake is it looks good, but then instead of saying XL, it says XI. So the forger in Japan, the forgeries were all produced in Japan. The forger in Japan didn't know his Roman numerals, and so the stamp looks good, but it says 11 instead of 40. And so that's the easy way to tell the fakes on this particular stamp. And at any given moment, you can find the stamp mint and used on eBay. So these are just kind of a summary of the initial of the stamps that were used. There were overprints when Chosun changed its name to Daehan Empire. There were overprints and revaluation when they changed the currency to Jun and Won. Then you have some variations on these particular four stamps. But basically, these are the types of stamps that Korea issued in 1884 and then again from 1895 to 2005. I'm sorry, to 1905. And what I collect and what I've spent, wasted, invested, I'll let you choose the verb, the most money on, is on these early stamps, Kuhanma, as they're referred to in Korea, the end of old Korea. And unfortunately, they don't reproduce very well on the screen, but these are cancellations. So the stamps, they're only 40 or 50 stamps. It takes some money, but it doesn't take a lot of time to collect all of these stamps. But what's been interesting, and what's made this more interesting than coins or postcards or other things, is the variation collecting cities. Anyone recognize that name? Mulan. It's a little hard to see. This one is very hard to see. Jincheng. Can anyone see this one? Pyongyang. So initially, in 1895, well, there was a very initial cancel for Seoul and Incheon, but then the widely used there were two cancellations. One was a single, double circle. In the middle was one character, and there were about 20 cities in Korea that had post offices, and you would have Han for Hansung, or you would have Na for Naju. And so I justified spending $400 on one stamp because I'm learning the character Na, and this is a very difficult character to learn, or Kyung for Kyungju. But occasionally they used the second character, like Daegu was Gu instead of Tae. Busan was Dongnae. And so in Incheon, and Han for Hansung. Initially it was Gyeongsang, but then they switched the name to Hansung. So initially you had what's called a double circle. In the middle of the circle would be the character for the city, and then around the circle would be the dates. And it would be Chosun, Angmu, Samyeon, and then it would have the date going around in a circle. So the middle would be one character. Then about the year 1900, they call it the split circle. And at the top of the circle you have, and the double circle are very expensive. Even Seoul and Incheon are minimum $1,500 for an unusual city. Gyeongsang in North Korea is easily $1,000, $2,000 if you can find one. But there are about 20 or so of these. But then in 1900, the postal system expanded to several hundred. And so what's fun for me is to collect different cities. This one is impossible to read, but it's supposed to be Gongju. This is for Gongju. So, and then it says Gwangmu. I think Pa, maybe that's Pa. It's very hard to read. Apologize. But so you have the name of the city or the post office at the top, and then you have the date at the bottom. And that's what I have collected the most of. And so I'm proud or ashamed to say, I'm not sure which one it is, but I probably, outside of Korea and Japan, I probably have more of these cancels than any other crazy form. And so my ultimate goal will be to collect all of these postcards. I don't think anyone has done that. But it's my excuse for learning Korean geography and learning Hanja is to collect these. And so you have the city name at the top, and you have the date at the bottom. And then they had about a dozen cities that had foreign cancellations. And of course you have Seoul, but they adopted the International Postal Union, which was in French. And unfortunately, these are the ones that I was able to find on the internet today. My collection is in the U.S. So this is the only one that I was tempted to place a bid on was Pyongyang, because it's Pyongyang, and it's this particular stamp. It's unusual to see it used in Pyongyang. And you have the date here, and it's Gwangmu Chil-yeon, which is 1903. And then you can see here what month it is. So it's the month of September, but you can only see day. You can't see what day it is. The actual date is used to be here. So anyways, these cancellations are what I found most interesting. But among these foreign cancels, everyone knows what the name of Incheon was. Chemulpo. And so you get those are Incheon and Chemulpo and Seoul are the most common for the foreign cancels. But then of course you have Daegu, you have Busan, which is spelled with an F. You have Wonsan, and then a certain person here knows our favorite is Gwendolyn. And Gwendolyn is a blue cancel. I have about 20 of them, but none of them here to show you tonight. But does anyone know where Gwendolyn was in North Korea? I know one person knows.
Go on, Robert, man.
Robert, tell us.
It's the area of the British gold mines.
British gold mines of Unsan. So it's the town of Unsan where some battles were fought in the Korean War. And so American GIs have actually been up in that area looking for remains of American soldiers. But these are gold mines, some of them owned by the Hoover family, I think.
No, they were owned by the Kors family. And
this is one audience I have to be very careful about what I say, because there are many individuals in this room that know the story better than I do. But but it says Gwendolyn, and it's in blue. And but the interesting thing is, why would a Korean city have the name Gwendolyn? Why? It's a cute British name. I don't think it's American. Cute. Why would a city in North Korea be called Gwendolyn? This is you take what story you want to take, but the most interesting explanation I heard is that there are dolmens in these areas. The only one I've ever seen is in Hanwha, though. I know there are others scattered in different places, but these rocks that are set up all akin to Stonehenge. In Korean, they're called Goindol. And the story is that the British miners heard the Koreans referring to these as Goindol and heard Gwendolyn. And so they named Unsan Gwendolyn. This isn't it seems believable to me. But that's how apparently, possibly, the name, the town got its name. So it has a historical significance for the mining interest as well as during the Korean War. So anyway, this is what I find for me personally, most interesting about Korean stamps is this turn of the century use of Korean stamps. But again, I wanted to show you, again, under the perhaps false assumption that I'm inspiring any of you to go out and actually buy any of these stamps, I just want to show you the difference between real ones and fake ones. These are all real, these are all fake. You can see they look different, they're crude. They were all made in Japan. Everything bad comes from Japan, right? Public sentiment is public sentiment. So all of these were made in Japan to sell to tourists visiting Japan and Korea. So they're made in Japan, but they're pretty crude forgeries. But on eBay, your average eBay seller has no idea whether they're fake or not. So you need to be a little careful that, and there are variations in terms of the color, the perforation. So these are real, but they're not the only variety that are real. But these are very fake. This one here is I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm more than 90% sure, I'm just looking at an image, is a reprint. And this stamp, if it were real, if it were an original, would be $2,000. It's the high value in the first issue that was made in Korea in around 1900. But what tells me it's a reprint is it's too fresh. The perforations are too neat, and the image is too fresh. But it looks real. But you can buy it on eBay right now for $30, I think, at least as of this afternoon. So you want to be careful of fakes, and you want to be careful of reprints. In fact, in the late 1950s, the South Korean government made a set of reprints. I don't know if they were using the original plates. They look like the original plates, but they're very good reproductions. Caveat emptor, as they say. During the Japanese occupation period, this is a black hole for, I see, Tony Michelle here, another philatelist. Happy to have a few of those closet philatelists here. But in the for Korean collectors, the Japanese colonial period is a black hole. You don't collect it. It's Japanese. But there were, unfortunately, there were several images that I couldn't find in the time I had today to prepare, and one is there was a stamp issued in Shanghai for the provisional government in the early 1920s, which is kind of cool, and it's very rare, and I think we would spend at least $100 or $200 for this stamp. But there were no. From 1905 to 1910, you could use Korean stamps, but after 1910, it was illegal to use Korean stamps. So from 1910 to 1945, all stamps used in Korea had to be Japanese. And so, as a good Korean wannabe, I do not collect this period. It's okay to collect it if you're Japanese, but it's not okay to collect this period if you're Korean. So this is a black hole. This is a gap. And so what we did have is the American missionaries here. And by the way, a lot of the stamps that I was buying back in the good old days, the old days are always good, aren't they? But the good old days of eBay, you could find stamps on eBay. Missionaries were going to Uiju. I have a lot of stamps from Uiju, from missionaries that were sending their mail to the United States. But you could find stamps on eBay that were used at the turn of the century by missionaries for their families. But then in the 1930s, missionaries, before they were kicked out when World War II broke out, American missionaries, this is one of the early Christmas seals. The only stamps that were being issued in Korea were by American missionaries for Christmas seals. Of course, there are many stamps commemorating the March 1st movement, but I just chose two related to Japan. Not too many countries put assassins on stamps. Independence fighter, excuse me. But this is the only positive stamp issued by South Korea since 1945 relating to Japan. It's for the 20th anniversary of normalization relations. This is a postal card that was issued right after liberation to commemorate that. So during the colonial period, that's kind of a black hole for Korean collectors of Korea. The U.S. military government in Korea is a really, for me as an American, is a very interesting period. And these are some of the most, for me personally, the most meaningful commemorative stamps. And they're also valuable. Among these, which do you think is the most valuable? Do you know the way Koreans think? It should be obvious. To me, personally, the most valuable one are these two, because it's the first election in Korea in May of 1948. But the most valuable one, the one you'll spend $200 or $300 if you buy it, is this one. Of course, it's the president. But these were all stamps issued from 1946 to 1948 by the U.S. military government. This is the first stamp that was issued. And of course, when I first got it, Sunjo Banghae. That. But it's interesting that until 1948, Hanguk was actually Chosun. And this is the very first stamp issued by the U.S. military government here. And then, but then there are several dozen stamps issued in this 3-year period. But these are the 6 that I consider the most meaningful: the establishment of the Constitution, the opening of the National Assembly, the first elections in May of 1948, and this is the establishment of the government when the U.S. military government ended on August 15th, 1948. So these, to buy all of these stamps in the set that they belong in would probably cost today about $1,000. In the case of the Syngman Rhee stamp, they only issued 50,000. So it's, and we have no idea how many survived war and whatever else. So there are only, at most 20,000, 30,000 of many of all of these stamps that still exist. This one is very cheap. The rest of these are only 50,000, 100,000 were issued. They're very, very expensive. But for me, they're some of the most meaningful stamps that Korea issued, especially the first elections that were ever held on the Korean Peninsula.
Hey, a quick question.
Sure.
In what capacity was Lee Seung-man on that stamp? It was under the U.S. military government. Was he already voted president before the Republic was proclaimed, or how did that work?
Good question. That's a good question. I think I'm assuming he had been elected, but had not been inaugurated. So I'm assuming that he was elected, but had not been inaugurated. As you can see, the date is July, so July 24th. So 3 weeks before he was inaugurated. So this is the most expensive of all of Korea's commemorative stamps that were issued after 1945. This one is the most expensive. It's the first presidential stamp. These are just a few stamps from the 1950s. Tokdo Uri Tang이죠. This is the first Tokdo stamp. It's a set of 3 stamps. This sheet, this is also, please don't tell my wife this, but this is also one of the more expensive items in my collection. To buy these, there is a set of 3 of these. These were issued 4287. I think that's around 1956. 54. These were issued in 1954 when Korea was really reasserting, when Lee Seung-man was reasserting his claim or Korea's claim over Tokdo. And these are the first. There's a second stamp that was issued about 10 years ago that really pissed off Japan when it was issued. It's just a stamp. Japanese government didn't care for that. I put this one in here because if you look at this, it says Gukto Tongil Ginemupu. This was issued in the fall of 1950 after the MacArthur landing, when South Korea, with the help of the United States, essentially controlled virtually the entire Korean peninsula. In the end, this stamp had to be issued from Busan because by the time that stamp was actually issued, North Korea, with the help of China, had launched a counteroffensive, and they'd been pushed back to the Busan perimeter. But this is a set of stamps that includes the image of Lee Seung-man when he thought that Korea had been reunified with the help of the United States. And apologize for non-Americans in the room, but I had to choose a few stamps relating to our bilateral relations. So this is from a set in 1951 the first color stamps that Korea produced, and it was for all of the countries, 2 stamps for each of the countries that participated in the Korean War. And this is how I learned that countries like Colombia and Thailand and India, I think Catherine Weathersby is maybe the only person in this room that could name all of the countries that sent contingencies.
Make a quiz about it.
You could. It's 21 or 22 countries, right? 22? 21.
Depends on your definition.
Like India sent a medical detachment. So some of them are kind of marginal and well, they were here. But anyways, this was issued in Busan. It was the very first color stamp issued by Korea, and of course I had to choose the American one. But they did make one mistake. When the designers were making the stamps, they issued the stamp for Italy when it was still ruled by a king. And so there are actually 2 versions of the Italian stamp. One with the symbol for Italy, the flag for Italy when it was a kingdom, and the second for when it was a republic. When these stamps were issued. I mean, these are just a couple of stamps that were issued in the 1950s to mark the relationship with the United States. And then, of course, Eisenhower himself visited Korea in 1960, and Syngman Rhee visited in 1954. These are just a few stamps to highlight the Pak Chung-hee period in the 1960s. It's interesting that this stamp was issued 1 month. It's interesting they were still using the traditional calendar, but it was issued 1 month after the military coup. But then 1 year later, they issued a set of 3 stamps along with these souvenir sheets, which are also not cheap. But it lays out concretely what the goals of the Pak Chung-hee government are. Positive, uncompromising opposition to communism is the basis of our policy. And it's interesting that I learned that Pak Chung-hee was a hard-carrying communist. Had been when he was young. So it's interesting that he wanted to make it very clear. Item number 1. And Kim Dae-fan, you have to tell me when you started to collect. I know you didn't collect this stamp yourself, but tell me when.
Yeah, I used to.
You had that stamp?
All these stamps.
You collected all of them?
Yeah.
Cool. So this, you can collect these. The set of stamps of 3 is very cheap. These souvenir sheets, they're issued both in Korean and in English, are more expensive. For me, the most important stamp on this page is this one. And in fact, I used it as the lead for my first column that I wrote back in 2001 on the 40th anniversary. First time I wrote a column for a Korean newspaper was for Dongailbo. And I wrote my lead, and they said it was the first time they'd ever used a photograph in a column. Because I mentioned this stamp as being one of the ugliest stamps that Korea has issued, but one of the most meaningful. Because this stamp was issued on the first anniversary of the student revolution in 1960. This is a photograph actually taken from Dongailbo of students and professors demonstrating against Syngman Rhee in the spring of 1960. And so it's an ugly stamp, at least in my humble estimation. The printing technique is pretty crude, but it's one of the most meaningful ones because it's really the only stamp, other than the ones of the elections in 1948, that really kind of captured Korea's democracy. The government, of course, issued many stamps relating to economic development. I just chose a few to show you, but there are probably somewhere between 10 and 20 stamps that were issued relating to the 5-year plan. And I'm proud to say that the Asia Foundation, this is our 60th year in Korea, and we were an advisor to Pak Chung-hee on the 5-year economic plan. In the late 60s, early 70s, we had 5 advisors to the Korean government, and we advised him on his 5-year economic plans. But the government, of course, I think of as a developmental dictatorship, and these stamps kind of capture that period for me. And I just wanted to show you some, I don't want to say rogues gallery, presidential stamps that have been issued since then. There are many Pak Chung-hee stamps. I think on a yearly basis, Chun Doo-hwan, ugliest president? Certainly the most bald. The most bald president that Korea has had. He issued the most himself on an annual basis from 1980 to 1987, for sure. But Park Chung-hee had a lot of stamps, but I do note that Jimmy Carter visited in 1979, and President Reagan visited in the early 1980s. In 83. Since the Democratic elected president the first election in 1987, every president since 1987, each president has gotten one stamp, with the exception of, who's the one president who has received more than one stamp since 1987? Only one, and it's Kim Dae-jung, because he thought he deserved a stamp for getting the Nobel Prize. Even though the government paid a lot of money for that handshake, hindsight. But anyway, so the custom has been that until 1987, issue stamps whenever you want. For yourself, since 1987, since 1988, it's been one stamp for each president. It's interesting that when YS became president, it's interesting that he had his image appear with Beck-san, with Chunji. And I think it shows the expectation of the government in the early 1990s. Oh, North Korea, they're going to collapse soon. We're going to be unified. And I think it reflects this false hope that Korea would be unified soon. So, and these are the more recent ones. And you can go to, there are stamp shops in Yangon if you wanted to get any of these stamps. The Chundewan stamps are really cheap. The Park Chung-hee stamps are kind of expensive. So you can see how the Korean public, or philatelists at least, evaluate their previous presidents. These are all pretty reasonable, but the souvenir sheet's actually pretty expensive because there's a very limited number that were made for Park Chung-hee last year. So now let's turn to, I'm sorry, one more page. So, I'm focusing tonight on stamps with a political theme, because that's who I am, that's what I do. So there are thousands or hundreds, if not thousands, of cultural stamps, of thematic stamps. You can collect birds, fish, trees. There are all kinds of subjects, and Korean history, and culture and food, but I just chose stamps over the last 4 or 5 years that kind of have more of a political theme. And starting with these two stamps are very much related to, or these two are related to MD's policy of green growth and the Four River Project. Yeah, some booze there. So even in the 2000s, so you can see that from very early on, Korean stamps were a political message, but even in more recent years, they've been a statement of the intentions and aspirations of the government. So you have green growth here, you have the Four Rivers Project here, but then you have the G20 summit, you have the nuclear summit. This was a stamp to commemorate Iljo. How much is Iljo? 1 billion? Trillion?
Yeah.
Trillion? So commemorating $1 trillion in trade, and then this is for so you don't accuse me of being too pro-American. I think this is the 130th anniversary of German-Korean relations. So they've been issuing stamps for a number of countries, but not Uruguay. I learned from Ambassador Kim, but a number of other countries. Peru, I think they got their own stamp. But Mexico, I know, did. But the Korean governments have been issuing stamps for the countries that they've had diplomatic relations with.
It's 100 billion. I can't let that go. $100 billion.
100 billion.
A trillion would be a lot of money.
100 billion?
$100 billion.
Sold for 100 billion. So now to turn to North Korea. North Korea numerically has issued almost twice as many stamps as South Korea. And North Korea, of the early stamps, the very first stamp from North Korea shows Kumgang-san. But it's kind of boring. So I wanted to show you what I consider the most interesting North Korean stamp. And it's a little hard, the image is not as distinct But I'll give you one easy guess as to who that is. Kim Il-sung. But what's behind him? Hanguk. I don't think this stamp is very popular in North Korea. But if you notice, it's hard to read, but you can see Chinese characters here. Russian. This is Russian, and but it's a multilingual stamp. It is, again, this is another one that I'll tell my wife about, but this is probably the most expensive. I think I paid $200 for this stamp. It's the most valuable North Korean stamp that I have, because to me it's the most interesting. There are a lot of, another image that I would have liked to have included here, but I didn't have time to find, was the capture of Seoul. They issued a stamp for that. But it's safe to say that North Korean stamps overwhelmingly focus on the Kim family. I haven't actually traced when Kim Il-sung appeared on his first stamp. But certainly by the, what was his first stamp? Much later than South Korea. I never really thought about this. 72, when he was 60? I'm not sure if he appeared on a stamp other than this before 1972, when he was, and that's when, 72 was when the badges appeared in North Korea. 72 was his Hanguk. There weren't many stamps before 72, but certainly after 72, there are a lot of stamps with him.
Is that related to the new constitution in 72?
Possibly, yeah. Possibly. I hadn't really thought about it, but 72 is kind of possibly a turning point. But anyway, since the 70s, there have been, every year, there are many, at least 10 stamps relating to the Kim family. I just a few. But Kim Jong-suk, of course, is very important for the mythology of the North Korean regime, and I guess this is one of those believe it or not images from North Korea. But the Kim family has really dominated, certainly over the last 40 years, they've really dominated North Korean stamps. This is when I really started to run out of time, so I don't have as many examples to show you. But this was the stamp that was issued when Kim Jong-il died. This is the stamp. This is a stamp. This is an image that I've never seen before this year, but I think it was issued earlier this year, if I'm not. Yeah, 2014. So it was issued this year. So in any given year, North Korea issues 50 or 60 stamps, and I would say about half of them have a political theme, about half of them are topical. It can be dinosaurs, it can be jackals eating flesh of some animal. I mean, they have bizarre subjects on some of their stamps. Thematic stamps, again, the North Korean stamps for many years were part of the Iron Curtain, wallpaper. Iron Curtain were terms that were used to describe North Korea, Bulgarian, Russian, Romanian stamps. This is a way to allow, countries with issue stamps to earn money. North Korea doesn't make a lot of money today on their stamps, but they still are very serious about issuing stamps. Again, this image is from this year. This is, I believe, the first Kim Jong-un stamp that was issued, but these are just some examples. This is from his New Year's message last year. But he appears on any given year on 5 to 10 stamps in North Korea. But his father and grandfather also get stamps issued. Again, another 5 to 10 stamps, both for his father and his grandfather. So I would say of the 50 or so stamps that are issued each year, about half have a very political theme. And these are just some images I wanted to show you. This is Korea's New Year's stamp for this year. Every year they issue a New Year's stamp. There are new apartments. I was in Pyongyang last September and got to see, even at night, it's very impressive to see the new apartments that have been built. Of course, we learned that one of them collapsed a few weeks ago, so some of them are better than others. But the regime is clearly very proud. This is not the only stamp that features some of the, and Pyongyang, you would be surprised given what we think we know about North Korea, has some nice neighborhoods. We know it's the city for the privileged. But these are just some examples of Kim Il-sung-ism. It's become, and you see this, I haven't found a stamp yet, but I certainly reading Rodong Shinmun have seen lots of mentions of Kim Il-sung Minjo, that they're no longer the Chosun Minjo, they're no longer the Korean people, they're now the Kim Il-sung people. But this is an example of Kim Il-sung Jui, of Kim Il-sungism. And this is, some of their ideology related to agriculture. This is Joel Witt, who is former State Department official. When he found out that I was a stamp geek, gave me a copy of this stamp. But this is their first missile stamp, I guess they like to say satellite stamp, from 1998. And I think this is the second one that was issued last year, or the year before? A year before, last year, I think. Hard to read. But they're very proud of their satellite launch capability. And of course, no display of North Korean stamps would be complete without showing you there's a constant theme of anti-Americanism. This is probably my favorite. It's the only stamp that I know of that says "Ino," and I'll let others translate that. I've gotten in trouble for my translation of "Ino" in an interview that I gave. But when South Koreans see this stamp, they think, "Wow." Put this on. Okay, put that on. But there are probably somewhere between 20 and 30 stamps that have been issued by North Korea with a virulently anti-American theme. But again, this is probably the most infamous, to me at least. But this is from the 60s, and this one is from last year. Nite. So when I meet North Koreans, I usually say 안녕하십니까 미제놈입니다. And I don't see Dan Kingston here tonight, but if Dan was here, he would really like this stamp because he set up the Seoul chapter of the Brave Sons of the General Sherman some years ago. And there's another stamp. The Pueblo has its own stamp. North Korea is the only country in the world that is holding an American military asset. No other country in the world. And I've actually been on the Pueblo. This was 7 or 8 years ago. My guide was supposedly one of the commandos that we took. He was old enough. This is one of those believe it or not stories, and a lot of things are kind of hard to believe when it comes to North Korea. But I've been on the Pueblo, and they're very proud. It has its own stamp, but in my flurry to put these together, I didn't have a chance to find that stamp. But I had not seen that, actually. I don't remember seeing this stamp before I found it this afternoon for the General Sherman. But they're very, this is the American imperialist invasion ship, which, well, it wasn't quite an invasion, but they weren't there to make friends. So anyway, I just want to give you a flavor for some of the anti-American stamps that come out from North Korea. This is for the Japanese. This is the good. This is the best and the worst. There are others, but this is the worst and the best of North Korean stamps relating to Japan. This one was just issued about 4 years ago. But they did issue a Koizumi stamp. Now I should back up and say, does the average North Korean know that these stamps exist? Probably not. Just like the average North Korean probably doesn't know that Chosun Munhak exists. That doesn't prevent some analysts from devoting whole books to analyzing Chosun Munhak, which I don't think really tells you a lot about what the North Korean people do. That's for another royally generous society gathering. but I just wanted to show you a couple of images relating to Japan. Surprise, surprise, they like China. There are a lot of stamps, dozens of stamps playing up the relationship with China. I just chose a few that I had time to find, but there are 30, 40, 50 stamps total extolling the relationship that between China and North Korea. And for South Korea, there are a total of 3 South Koreans that have appeared on North Korean stamps. Number 1 is Kim Dae-jung, and I have to say I never thought I would see a North Korean stamp that would feature a South Korean president. Does anyone know who is in this stamp?
Oh, it's the flower of unification in Seoul.
Not bad. Very good, Jacko. Exactly. The flower of unification in Seoul, who is a member of the National Assembly.
Is she still?
Last time I checked, I met her for the first time last year, and at the National Assembly. She was very nice. Within the 5 minutes that I spent with her, but I know she's a very controversial figure here in Seoul. But I told her that I remembered her from this period, and she was happy about that. So I mentioned that 3 South Koreans have appeared on North Korean stamps. The first is Im Soo-kyung. Another is Kim Dae-jung. Who's the third? This is tough. This is anyone knows exactly. You're not going to know who the third person is.
When?
Between these two. To give you a hint. So sometime between 1989 and 2000. The only little one is Moon Hee-kwan. So those are the 3 South Koreans that have been graced, appeared on North Korea. This is a theme, maybe 7 or 8, 10 stamps total, talking about, they've issued a number of stamps relating to the summit in 2000. This one was issued for the 10th anniversary, the Minjokiri, which to me, I'm sorry, but my cynicalness means Hondodawa. Minjokiri is literally among Koreans only, among Koreans, but to me it means give us more money. But the North likes this expression, and some governments in the South have used it as well, but this is something that the North has promoted.
It's like the World Youth Communist Summit 1989.
And I wanted to end with the most ridiculous stamp that North Korea has. And the story is, I have not confirmed this story, this is another one in the Believe It or Not department, but in the early 1980s, North Korea ceded its stamp issuing authority to some a European company that made any stamp that they thought they could sell to other Europeans. So there are about, I think about 20 stamps related to Princess Diana that I don't think you can find very easily in Pyongyang. But I thought there's another stamp that shows Kim Jong-il planting his loafer on the top of Mount Baekdu. That's another one of the more humorous stamps for me, but I didn't have a chance to grab that image. But this is, but North and South Korea take these stamps, issuing of these stamps fairly seriously. And so there is, I hope I've shown that origins of Korean stamps, but also the competition. And you can look, if you put the catalog side by side, you can see that there's been a tacit competition between the two regimes over the issuing of these little pieces of paper. So. Thank you. I don't know if you came here because of the stamps or because of me, but thank you for coming here this evening, and I welcome any questions that you have relating to Korean stamps. Starting with front, Professor.
Yeah. So, first I want to apologize, because ESO is a trillion. I don't know why I got confused.
It is a trillion.
It is a trillion, 10 to the 12. But, so, you just not have a chance to show us, but did South Korea make a commemorative stamp for 2011?
Yes,
Or is
they
that
did.
piece?
South Korea's Indonesian government did issue a stamp for the 2000, but it did not show them shaking hands. It was more of a symbolic image. But yes, good question.
I was kind of curious in terms of the trend among collectors. After doing the Renaissance themselves, did the value of those that stamps increase?
That's a great question. I mentioned that Chunduan stamps are very cheap, and Pak Chung-hee stamps are not. I don't know. I haven't been following the market very closely. I do know that the Hakane souvenir sheet is the most expensive, only because of the limited number that were released. But I don't know. It's a really good question. The Nomihan stamp has gotten more expensive since this passing. Jacko.
Thanks for your excellent presentation. I have both an anecdote and a question. Could you go back to the previous slide, please? Okay. In 2010, in August, when I was in Pyongyang at the Yongapdo Hotel, I bought one of these souvenir stamp sheets in the hotel and showed it to the waitress in the bar, and I said, "Do you know who this is?" And she said, "Yes, of course, that's Kim Dae-jung." And I said, "Do you know who this is?" "You don't point! You don't point at him!" She hit my hand on. "You don't point at him. You gesture. You gesture upwards with both hands. This is our wonderful leader, Kim Dae-jung." Sorry, you have to get to see it.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you made that point because actually, in Pyongyang, if you stay at the Keio Hotel, there are usually 3 hotels that they put foreigners. My first visit when I was at the International Crisis Group, we stayed at the Keio. Next door is a philatelic center. And it's a quasi-museum display sales center. And you can buy, it's fun, you can go and say, "Can I have every Juche stamp that you've issued?" And the woman knows, okay, this number, and she pulls out the stamps. But this stamp is on display in the philatelic center prominently, along with, an assortment of North Korean stamps and Korean and the early Korean stamps. They also show images of those. So yes, it's interesting that the North Korean government is still very positive about the summit that happened in 2000 and railing against all subsequent governments for not meeting up to the expectations that they had in 2000. Other question?
And my question now, the paper that I read by Ross King recently about North Korea stamps, he said that North Korea issues stamp catalogs in English and in Chinese and perhaps no longer, but also once in Russian, to encourage overseas philanthropists to collect North Korean stamps. He said he found no evidence of a Korean version of a catalog. So from his knowledge, there was no domestic stamp collecting market in North Korea. Do you have any evidence that there might be North Korean stamp collectors?
I absolutely don't. And at the very, Ross King is a member of our stamp, Korea Stamp Geek Society. And I did not know that, but it does not surprise me that there isn't a Korean catalog for North Korea. They were selling a catalog that I think was issued in 2012, but it was quite expensive, and it was $40 for a paperback catalog of North Korean stamps. I didn't buy it. Tony, another collaborator.
Well, North Korea's family is in the 60s. Everybody collects.
In North Korea, in the 60s, people.
I've seen 1 or 2 collections that people have brought in.
Really? From the 60s? Sort of like South Koreans were collecting here in the 70s. Were they just collecting North Korea, or were they collecting other countries?
No, they were collecting wherever they came from.
East Germany, Cuba.
Inside the Iron Curtain.
Really? So you've met North Koreans that told you they were collecting in the 60s?
No, their fathers.
Their fathers.
And some of them have preserved their collection.
Interesting.
They are very small.
That's cool.
Everybody gets just
Other questions, comments? Andy?
Is there a person service across the DMZ prior to 1950, and also forgive my ignorance, but who is Munikwon?
Munikwon was a left-wing reverend who he made an unauthorized trip to Pyongyang and was arrested subsequently. This is around 1990, 91, 92.
He was the guy that went to either talk to or to receive Kim Soo-jong, wasn't he?
I believe it was 89.
Was it 89? My memory is hazy. I thought, 89, 90? 89, so about the same time as Kim.
I like those.
Please.
At the time he went to North Korea, I was working at Busan Maritime University. And the day he was due to come back from North Korea, from his illegal trip to North Korea, he was due to cross the DMZ, and he was scheduled to be arrested as soon as he arrived. And there was going to be a demonstration in support of Munikwon at Busan National University, which, if you know, Busan is right at the north end of the city. And Maritime University was on an island on the island south of the city. And the president of Maritime University promised the students of Maritime University they could use the three school commuter buses to ferry students to this demonstration. And at the last moment, the president reneged on his offer, and in retaliation, the students smashed the windows in all these commuter buses. I was told about all this by students. And about 2 or 3 months later, I discovered what the truth of the matter was, that the leaders of the students had not, the student body were not very enthusiastic about travelling up to Busan National University to set this demonstration. And so, to save face, they invented this story of the president reneging on his promise and put their revenge on the buses and on the school staff.
Other questions or comments?
Sorry, was there any cross-border?
That's a good question. Was there cross-border mail prior to 1950? I don't know.
Yes, there was. I know this because I'm in touch with the man in England who is actually researching this right now. So he's having some of this cross-border mail which was confiscated during the war, captured during the war. He's having some of that translated. So there were regular weekly mail drop-offs at a railway station near the town of Keio, near the city of Keio.
All right, Jacko, then can you also tell me anything about the Dutch stamp dealer who was arrested by North Korea and detained for, was it a month or two?
2 weeks.
This is a really interesting case. I mean, this is a Dutch stamp dealer with a Korean wife, I think.
No, I think that's right. I went to his shop in Utrecht and met them. He had been dealing with North Korea and actually had a branch shop in Pyongyang.
So why would a stamp dealer be arrested and detained by the North Korean government?
I'll tell you after the lecture. There's some controversy about that. I'll talk after the lecture. But anyway, since that he has shut up his branch, he won't be going back there again in a hurry.
What a surprise.
I'm curious about the early forgeries. We know that 1884, all the stamps were turned around and sold to the Myers Company. We know that the American representative was speculating on stamps at the time because he seized all that he could. How many of these early forgeries actually originate in Germany? Because all the stamps were sold to the Myers Company.
Robert, you know a lot more about that than I do. I know nothing about it. I knew when I came here there were going to be people scattered around the room with much more knowledge than me on some of the topics I'm touching on. Please do tell. No, I know nothing.
I don't know that much about forgeries. I'm just
I
asking.
mean, the forgeries that I'm aware of were made in Japan. And I actually even wasn't aware that someone tried to corner the market on these early stamps.
They sold all of them to Myers Company.
German company?
In Incheon.
A German company in Incheon.
I don't remember how many thousands of stamps, but only the first two denominations were actually used. And then the latter three denominations, the Korean government was forced to pay for, even though they couldn't use them. And somehow they ended up being sold to the German company. And then after that, stamps are flooding everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, on eBay you can find these first 5 issues. Well, the real one, the first one that is a red stamp, it will cost you $20, $30, but the rest you can buy for 10 cents to $1. They for real.
You don't think they were actually utilized because the...
Like I say, there's a divide among the, I've met foreign Asian philatelic specialists who are skeptical of whether they're, because the real reason is that we don't have any copies that survive on cover. So from 1895, I have stamps I have covers from the Underwood family. I have, the covers are very common from 1895. But the problem is that all of the stamps that exist today are off cover. Sure. And so for a skeptical Western philatelic expert, they want to see an actual cover. And that's why they're skeptical. I think that's the main reason why they're skeptical about whether they're used. I'm willing, I've been in Korea long enough, I guess I'm willing to say, yeah, they're probably used. But, but we don't have any hard and fast proof that they were legitimately used before the service was shut down.
I think it's unfortunate that Horace Allen wasn't the American minister at that time, because the first thing he did with the new stamps in 1895 was he immediately seized the first 2 stamps and gave them to his children. And he told his children these are going to be worth a lot of money. So, always speculating.
It's the cancels that make those early issues valuable. It's the high values are expensive, the lower values, the common stamps are a couple dollars each. But if you have an interesting cancel, if you have a Gwendolyn, it's at least $100. $2 stamp becomes a $100 stamp if it has the right, or $1,000 stamp if it has the right cancellation on it.
One more. Yeah, thanks. I'm a bit of just an amateur on and off collector because I work near the main post office.
Yeah, that's right. They have a nice museum and a nice center there.
Yeah, and it seems to me like the only place in Seoul or anywhere that I've found every issue is available, every new issue. What is it in your experience or anyone else's? Is it true that like most of the post offices just are not receiving samples of or sheets of the new issues?
I'm embarrassed. I can't remember the last time I used a stamp from any company. So I did go there to buy the year sets. I went there a couple months ago to buy the year sets, but I have not tried to go to a random post office. I used to do this kind of like Ambassador Kim did. If a new stamp was coming out, I would go to my local office, and then I would buy a couple sheets and I would use them on mail. But I haven't done that in years. But in principle, 5 or 10 years ago, every post office would get at least a limited number of sheets. But it's a good question. I mean, if you look 10 or 20 years ago, they were issuing 3 to 5 million of each stamp. Now it's often 1 million or even less. So I know they're issuing, because people are using fewer stamps, fewer people are collecting them. So it's a good question. Is every post office getting the stamps? But I'm glad you mentioned it, because in Chungmuro, what was the central part of this new building has gone up there, but in the basement they have a little museum and then a philatelic center where you can buy stamps for 5 or 10 years ago at face value. So if you do have a reason to send anything, a package or cards, you can use some really nice stamps for the same price you would be paying for just a.
Okay.
electronic label or something.
Thank you very much.
Andy's going to kick me out of here.